people who can already draw still can get stuck in something that from where they say, well, now what? How do I go from here? How can I improve? Because that is the most important thing. People lose interest when there's no growth, and rightfully so. So let's start with always sharpening our pencils. This is the drawing of one of my students, which is absolutely gorgeous. But she's not happy with it because she said, well, I need to be bolder. I want to have more to it. And I was interpreting that as there has to be more body to it. There has to be more drama or more choices, basically. And what it mostly is that there is the background has not been incorporated because there's always a background, and it's not only about the lines. But to get started, I would say tone the paper. You can tone the paper with a watercolor pencil. I'm going to use a watercolor pencil in this. But to make the first drawing, the first outline, I use a regular HB pencil. It is an outline on toned paper. That means I already am forced into incorporating the background, which in this case is a wooden table, and it has a shadow from light, natural light, coming in from the window. And as you can see later, when I move the camera a little bit, you will see that the shadow can change. So your eyesight, your position of your eyes towards the subject is very, very important. If you move your chair a little bit, you will have a different drawing. If you have a spotlight, you will have a different drawing. The light and how it hits the subject is all that matters. And I want you to be inspired too. The inspiration will force you to also look at things a little bit deeper, a little bit different than at first glance. So your position is important. The position of the light towards the subject is important. And the composition of the subject on your paper is important. If you have trouble finding something that you like, then make 10 thumbnail sketches. And here's how I would do it too. I would get one piece of paper and make small 1 to 2 inch formats of different cutouts that you can make. You can look at this subject in many different ways, and if you want to know which way is going to be most pleasing to you, then make these 10 different sketches. If this takes a long time, just make one that will take you 20 minutes and then set a timer to 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 4, etc., until you can make a thumbnail sketch in less than a minute. And a thumbnail sketch is nothing more than the outline plus very roughly the value. And the value you can find by squinting, looking through your eyelashes. Then you know that even though this leaf is green, which is darker than white, because of the light that shines through it, it has a translucency, which makes the leaf lighter than the wooden table. So squint to see the values really clearly. The tulip itself is red, which also you would say, well, that's a no-brainer. the value of the tulip is dark, of course. But that's not of course, because the wooden table is darker. The wooden table is solid. The leaves of the tulip are not solid. The light is lighting them up, making them translucent. Now here comes the good part in play of having the paper toned. With an eraser, now I light up the lightest light, the highlights. There's so much to see in a simple subject like this that I want you to surrender to it instead of walking away and intellectually saying, oh, I know that's a tulip and a leaf, and I know how to draw that. Now we're going to really look at which value is darker, which is lighter, what is really happening. And if you have trouble with the hatching and cross hatching, then I would suggest you take a watercolor pencil, and you can even make circles if you want to make something darker, because hatching and cross hatching values is only about gray tones. And then use water to make your value. Then let that dry and go over it again. Now, I made a mistake here. It's not really a mistake, but this is regular sketch paper. And regular sketch paper is not meant to absorb a lot of water. So with a watercolor pencil, it gives some trouble. In the end, it's not even that bad. But you see that the water will wrinkle the paper. If you put it then between the leaves of a thick book, or you're going to sit on it, then it will flatten itself. So do that if you notice that your paper is not absorbing the water. Don't keep going, because the paper will get very tired fast. Now here, this is the subject, and you see how you can look at it in different ways. Sometimes the shadow is very confined, very defined, and sometimes it is not. I decided to make the drawing again with now watercolor paper and use the watercolor paper stronger than I did before. It's the same drawing, it's exactly the same position I'm sitting in. I do the outline again in a regular HB pencil, but pretty soon I'm already changing that to a watercolor pencil. I haven't toned it, but I'm going to tone it around it so I don't have to erase it. I don't know how hard it is to erase a watercolor pencil, but it's the same principle. We know where the darkest dark is, and we know where the lightest light is. So in this case, I leave the lightest light alone. That part of the paper I'm not going to touch at all. And with hatching and cross hatching, I build it up darker and darker and darker. This is without the water yet, but I can already do a lot. Now I see the grain in the wood, which I'm going to incorporate in the drawing because I actually like the movement of that. Sharpen your pencil at all time, because that is what your lines are going to show. The good thing of a pencil is that the veins of the plants, you can make those without too much trouble. Now I'm going to add water to the whole thing, but remember, this is watercolor paper, so it can absorb the water much better. I still need to let it dry, but it dries faster. And now the wood of the table is making the backdrop of the red tulip. Don't do it solid. Don't fill the paper to the edges with the tone, but pick and choose your outline, basically. Now that is dry, I go over it with a 6B regular pencil. So this is not a watercolor pencil. I want to leave those parts, the hatching and the cross hatching, I want to leave that. It gives beautiful lines. The watercolor pencil is a little bit soft in the lines, but the 6B watercolor, the 6B regular graphite pencil, I leave those lines. So here's how we're building it up really, really slowly, darker and darker, not touching the lightest parts at all. And then you see the values, how many shades of gray this has. I don't know, but quite a bit. And it takes a long time before you get to the boring part that you think, well, now I'm getting bored with the subject. I hardly ever am bored with the subject. I don't want to overwork it. So that is the hard part. You don't want to overwork it. That's the mastery. Try this yourself. It doesn't have to be a tulip. It can be any other flower. Incorporate the background. If there's shadows of another subject, use it. Use everything that you see. If it's not 100% to your liking, change it, modify it, but do not modify the subject. You can play with the background. You can also move the subject to a part that you do like whatever is in the background. You can add things to it. Don't make it too complicated either, because there is already so much to see. And when you complicate it, it becomes overwhelming. And with overwhelm, you're not going to make a good product. You want to keep it simple, but at the same time, very elaborate in the drawing yourself. You're making a drawing, not a sketch. So we have 3 different tools that we used: an HB pencil, a watercolor pencil, and a 6B graphite pencil. We take time to let it dry, and then we make soft edges and hard edges. If you don't know what that is and you want to know more, please get in touch with me. There's, even with a simple object like this, like a tulip, is a lot to see and a lot to learn. And the object itself, plus the light, will tell you exactly what to do. Get in touch with me, and we'll find objects that might interest you, because that's another thing. It needs to interest you. If you are already bored with whatever you come up with, then don't even start it, because it will never be a good drawing. You have to fall in love with what is in front of you. Enough to sit down for, I would say, an hour maybe, and take time between the layers. You're actually really layering it. Always remember, the lightest light and the darkest dark. There's shadows, there is light falling through the object, there's an outline, there's values, and there's negative shape that will give you the right proportion of the whole thing. This is the second layer that I'm going to use with watercolor. So it gets darker and darker, and I let it fade away. So you're using more water at the edges. Let it fade away. You can also use a paper towel to lift it a little bit, or You can dry your brush and then lift it with a dry brush where you think there's too much water. Watercolor runs, it needs to run. You don't want to see brush strokes. Brush strokes belong to oil painting, but not in watercolor. The paper and the watercolor work together. That's why it's important to have watercolor paper. Don't have the strong textured watercolor paper, because then your pencil lines will not show as a line, but will be very bobbly. So you don't want to have that. Get in touch with me again, and let's make a beautiful drawing. Now I go over it with a 6B pencil when it is dry.